I took the document, put it in my mouth, chewed it until the paper turned to paste, and spat it back into her face. The ink bled down her cheek like melted mascara. She screamed. The young attorney grabbed for tissues. The memory doctor stared at me as if I had just lifted a car with one hand. Someone in the corner said, Is this part of the test? And my daughter, my own daughter, lifted her phone to film. That was the moment the game ended for them and began for me. They wanted to lock me in a nursing home, declare me incompetent, and put me under guardianship, all for a collection of knitted toys I kept in a cedar trunk. My daughter thought she would sell them to a collector who had been circling for months. She wanted to liquidate my life into cash and call it care. But the toys were never toys. Only 3 people in this world know what I knitted into them. One is dead. One wants me dead. And one, God help me, might be me. If you've met me in the daylight, you wouldn't expect any of this. My name is Vera, the name my mother gave me because she liked the shape of truth in the mouth. I am 62 years old, a grandmother twice over, though my grandson mostly knows me as a photograph held up for holiday video calls. I walk with intention, not because my body demands it, but because life taught me that a woman who walks like she's on an errand is left alone. I live in a narrow house at the end of a street where the lilacs lean over the sidewalk in May. The house smells like lemon oil and wool. There's a dent in the kitchen table at the place where my husband once set down a cast-iron skillet too hot to hold. He's been gone 11 years, but every morning I run my palm over that dent, and the shape of him sits with me while the kettle sings. People think knitting is gentle. They picture rocking chairs and peaceful afternoons. They never think of counting. They never think of the mathematics of a life, the way a choice can be coded into a row of pearls and knit stitches, how a secret can be recorded in odd numbers and slipped yarn. When I was 22, I learned from a woman named Dora how to knit discreet messages. Why would anyone need to hide words in wool? I asked her. Because paper burns, she said, and wool keeps a house warm. So I knitted toys. They were my answer to noisy grief after my husband died. A red fox with a mischievous tail, a whale with a belly you could unzip and fill with dreams, a gray wolf whose button eyes were mismatched on purpose, a bluebird with wings that folded just so. People told me they were charming. They were more than charming. In the cuffs of their tiny sweaters, in the spacing of their stripes, in the sequences no non-knitter would ever notice, I embedded dates, coordinates, account numbers, names. I embedded promises. I embedded the story of what happened to my sister. But all my daughter, Alina, saw was popularity. A craft blogger posted one of my foxes last autumn. Orders came from strangers who wanted the exact same shade of red, the exact bend of tail. A collector messaged my daughter privately. How he found her, I still do not know, with an offer large enough to make anyone lightheaded. Mama, Alina said, the night she brought over saffron rice and spoke like a business partner, we could sell 3 of them and you could fix the roof. You could travel for once in your life. You could stop worrying. I smiled and thanked her for the rice and told her I would think about it. I did not tell her that the fox's tail spelled a bank's name. I did not tell her that the wolf's eyes marked the months of a buried investigation. I did not tell her what the bluebird held in its chest, because I had never told anyone, not even my husband, not even myself on nights when speaking to the dark felt easier than sleep. I told her I would think about it. In the months that followed, Alina began arriving at my house with brochures. Independent living communities. Caring transitions. The stress-free path to guardianship for families. The last one had a photo of a silver-haired woman laughing on the cover, wind blowing her hair back as if freedom had just called her by name. It's not like I want you to go anywhere, she said, which is what people always say before they want you to go somewhere. But these places are nice, Mama. You'd have friends. Then she would glance, quickly, at the cedar trunk, where the toys lay wrapped in tissue, and the quickness would betray something sharp behind her eyes. I have friends, I said. I have my neighbor, Georgie, and his ridiculous cat. I have the postmaster who saves me the blue commemoratives. I have my own hands. I wiggled my fingers and smiled. That's not what I mean. She sighed. You've been forgetful. I have not been forgetful. I misplaced her trust once, years ago, and she never forgave me. The memory cost us both. When Alina was 10, I told her a truth she wasn't ready to know, that my little sister, Katia, did not run away at 19 the way my mother insisted. She had been taken by the kind of men who moved in dens of good suits and better smiles, who hunted in intake forms and sealed envelopes, who used the word guardianship like a key they could twist in any lock. Katia worked nights at a care facility where they signed frightened elders into a cage made of paperwork, siphoned their accounts, and managed their assets until their assets were gone. She had filed a statement with a reporter, then disappeared before she could deliver the attachments that proved everything she said. I found the reporter's card months later, folded inside one of Katia's books, a pressed clover marking the number. When I called, he had changed newspapers. When I visited, he did not answer the door. My mother drank and said prayer after prayer. I learned to count. Years later, after my husband died, I began knitting the list Katia never got to deliver. The names had not changed as much as you might think. Some people in this world are survivors because they are very, very good at finding new letterheads. And when a woman begins to keep track of what they prefer not to see, they call her forgetful. Alina found a doctor who would listen kindly and write down what she wanted to hear. Alina found an attorney with long eyelashes and a narrow voice who assured her that guardianship would relieve stress. Alina found a placement coordinator who visited my home and measured me with her eyes like a chair for sale. I offered tea. I kept my kitchen as bright and tidy as Sunday morning. I answered every question with the poise of a woman who has been underestimated by people insured against consequences. We'll need to schedule a cognitive assessment, the attorney said, sweeping a strand of hair behind her ear in a practiced motion that signaled both compassion and control. It's really just a conversation. Lovely, I said. I adore conversations. Alina looked relieved. The placement coordinator smiled, the kind of smile one brings to a closing. I smiled too, thinking of how paper tastes when it's already been read. The day before the assessment, I did something I hadn't done since my husband died. I asked for help. It is very hard to ask for help when your daughter is the one holding the door you hope to walk through. I didn't ask a friend or a relative. Those lines were tangled with old loyalties and careful debts. I asked a boy from 2 houses down, a 17-year-old with a bicycle he rebuilt by hand and a habit of noticing things. His name is Sava. He wears his hair long enough that the wind can memorize it. He once shoveled my snow without being asked and then said, as if explaining himself, "Some days my hands need to be tired." I called to him from my porch. "Do you like puzzles?" "Only if they keep me from other things I should be doing," he said, and grinned. Then his grin faded as he looked at me. "Are you all right, Ms. Vera? Would you like to see a fox?" He sat at my kitchen table and watched with solemn concentration as I unwrapped the red fox and set it gently in front of him. He held it respectfully as if it were a living thing. He touched the tail. He touched the ears. "It's beautiful," he said. "What do you see?" I asked. He squinted. "Symmetry. And then not symmetry. The tail moves like a question. The stitches here," he pointed to 4 discrete bumps near the base of the tail. "Why these in a cluster? The rest are so even." I felt foolish tears prickling my eyes. "Because you were born with good eyes," I said. "Do you like ciphers?" He did. I made soup and told him what I needed. I did not tell him everything. To get help, you give only the piece a person can hold. I showed him 3 toys, not the full trunk, and explained the row count code, the odd-even indexing, the way a yarn over-repeated at the edges turned a line of sweetness into a ledger. He learned quickly. By evening, he had transcribed the fox. "This looks like account numbers," he said. "And dates," I added. "And sums that will keep a man in a very fine suit for a very long time." "Why would they be in a fox?" "Because paper burns." He looked at me curiously then, as if he had never quite seen me before. "What do you want me to do?" "My daughter is trying to put me under guardianship," I said. "Come tomorrow and watch. Don't help me. Don't say anything. Just watch. If I call you that night, come back. I can only promise you a story in return." "That seems worth it," he said. When he left, I wrapped the fox again and slid the tissue back into the cedar trunk. I placed the trunk under the window where the lilac shadows dappled the lid. Then I pulled another toy from its corner, the bluebird. I held it for a long time, then tucked it into the bottom of my knitting bag beneath a folded shawl. It is important to choose what to carry with you when you might not be allowed to leave with anything. I slept well, like a woman who knows what her hands will do. They came at 10 the next morning, my daughter, her attorney, Ms. Raya, and Dr. Barnard, a memory specialist whose cufflinks were playful little magnifying glasses. Is it all right if I record? He asked. For my notes. Of course, I said. For mine too. I placed my phone face down on the table. Next to it, the kettle steamed. Alina took the chair nearest the cedar trunk as if proximity were ownership. She wore the blue blouse I bought her when she got her first job. She did not notice the stain near the hem where she spilled tomato soup in our kitchen and laughed until her ribs hurt. She did not notice the dent in the table that preserved her father's clumsiness the way photographs fail to do. She did not notice me. Or maybe she noticed me too much. We'll begin informally, Dr. Barnard said. Vera, tell me about a typical morning. I boil the kettle, I said. I put the coffee away because caffeine makes me reckless. I knit 3 rows while the water decides who it wants to be. Then I call the radio station and argue with the afternoon host about his crime series. You call the radio station often? Ms. Raya asked, smiling in a way that showed she had already made a note in her mind. Only when he's wrong, I said, and Dr. Barnard snorted before he turned it artfully into a cough. He asked me to recall lists. I recalled them. He asked me to subtract by 7s, and I obliged until both of us laughed at how pointless the exercise felt. He asked me to draw a clock with hands showing 1:45. I drew it precisely and then drew a second clock with hands set to 2:15. To show you how time moves, I said. It helps. He asked if I ever confused my keys. I told him yes, on purpose. It keeps me awake. He asked if I had fallen recently. Only for good arguments. The rhythm of his questions lulled the room until the air felt warm and shallow. Alina relaxed visibly. Ms. Raya stopped pressing her lips together and allowed them to part, just a little, as if a window had opened. The placement coordinator hadn't come today. She was waiting in the wings, as people like that prefer. All the lines on their diagram felt like they were moving in the right direction. There is a time for compliance. There is also a time for theater. Dr. Barnard closed his folder and looked at me with careful compassion. He was not a bad man. He was a man who had found a way to line his work with soft words. Vera, he said gently, do you ever get confused? Constantly, I said. By kindness. He nodded, thinking it was an answer, and turned to my daughter. If we move forward, he began, and those 4 words shifted the air in the room. Move forward. He might as well have put his hand on the small of her back and guided her toward a door I had paid for. Ms. Raya reached into her portfolio. We'll need you to sign a few preliminary forms to facilitate. I reached across the table and took the form from her hand. I did not ask permission. I did not apologize. I raised it to my mouth. I chewed. Paper tastes like dry rain. It softens slower than you think. It doesn't want to be swallowed. But I did not swallow. I chewed it coarse and spat it onto the table, onto my daughter's lap, onto those expensive trousers that make attorneys walk like dancers. Silence followed. Then a small, indignant, beautiful sound. Ms. Raya said, oh, as if someone had stepped on her foot. You want me to sign away my mind, I said calmly, wiping my lips on the napkin I had laid neatly at my plate. You want to mark me down with tidy words and then take the trunk under the window and sell the only ledger in this house that whispers back. You want to put me away somewhere with puzzles shaped like birds and kindly voices that never say the name of what's wrong. You want my toys. You cannot have them. Mama, Alina said, voice trembling with a cocktail of humiliation and outrage, you're being dramatic. I am being theatrical, I corrected. It is different. One is for effect. The other is for truth. Dr. Barnard had set his pen down. He was watching me with the face of someone who has just realized that his role in a play is smaller than he thought. You can't do this, Ms. Raya said tightly, dabbing her sleeve with a tissue. It's obstruction. I chewed paper in my kitchen, I said. You brought it here. If you don't sign, Alina whispered, I'll go to court. Go, I said. Take your wonderful attorney with you. Wear that blouse I bought you, and remember I ironed it the morning of your first interview because you were too nervous to move. Go. But before you do, please look in the mirror. If any of this is for me, you'll know." She stared at me. For a moment, the little girl who used to count raindrops on our car window flickered behind a grown woman's fury. Then the woman swallowed the girl. "Fine," she said. She stood. The attorney stood. Dr. Barnard stood because it felt like the right thing to do. Alina went to the trunk, not to open it, but to let her fingers trail along the cedar. Possession. The gesture had nothing to do with love. Then she left, and the house folded in on itself around the quiet they abandoned. Sava slipped in through the back door 3 minutes later as if the wind had carried him. "Miss Vera," he said, breathless and bright. "I have a feeling that was the beginning." "It was breakfast," I said. "The beginning is always earlier." That night, I opened the trunk and took out the wolf, the fox, the whale, the bluebird. I placed them in a row on the table and turned on the little desk lamp that makes everything look like confession. Sava sat opposite, pencil tapping lightly against his notebook. "Tell me about the wolf," he said. "It's my sister," I said. It smiles with a mouth full of sorrow. "We worked until midnight. We charted. We counted. We checked our work twice, then again as if our enemy would check it a third time for us. We found dates, court filings, hospital admissions, deeds transferred. We found sums, 5,000 here, 300 there, then a sweep of 62,000 that left a man's savings account so clean it reflected the balding head of the banker who signed the form. We found names that were not names, companies incorporated on Tuesdays, with addresses that matched the florist 2 blocks from the courthouse, a florist who had a brother with a license for elder care. We found something else. In the bluebird's chest, stitched in just under the knit rose, disguised as the mere shaping of a small breast, there was a run of numbers that was neither bank nor date. We chased it in circles until Sava said, carefully, "It looks like a case number." "For what?" "Missing persons." My hands went cold. He saw it immediately. "I'm sorry," he said, and lowered his pencil, as if releasing the weapon that had just cracked something in the air. "Don't be. The cold is useful. It keeps me from rushing." We did not chase the case number that night, though it hovered in the room the way a moth does when you pretend you don't see it. We made notes. We organized what we already had into 3 piles: evidence, inference, and story. Evidence keeps you honest. Inference keeps you moving. Story keeps you human. At 1 a.m, I packed the toys into my knitting bag, layered beneath the shawl, and walked Sava to the door. "You have given me your time," I said. "Tomorrow I may ask you for your courage." He nodded solemnly. "Will there be more paper chewing?" "Only metaphorically," I said, though I slipped a small wedge of lemon between my lips to erase the taste anyway. After he left, I stood by the window and watched the dark of my street hold its breath. Somewhere, a fox cut the night into shapes too quick for anyone to see. Alina moved quickly. She always had, even as a child, fast to joy, fast to anger, fast to conclusions that made the people around her dizzy. Within 48 hours, a uniformed woman knocked on my door with a welfare check and the smile of someone doing her best to be both a person and a policy. "We had a call," she said, without saying from whom. "May I come in?" "Of course," I said. I made cake. The uniformed woman took a polite inspection of my kitchen and my bathroom, asked whether the oven worked, touched my hand and asked, very gently, if I knew where I was. "At home," I said. "Where I keep the wolves." She frowned at that, then laughed. "I have 3 toddlers," she said. "Everything in my house is a wolf." When she left, she said, "Mrs. Vera, you know there's nothing wrong with asking for help." "I know," I said. "Today you gave me some." The attorney filed a petition for guardianship the following week, citing concern for recent erratic behavior and documented cognitive decline. It helps to have a document. It helps even more if the only person who saw you chew it is the one who wants you contained. I did not respond. I went to see a woman I hadn't visited in 11 years. Her name is Mara. She is my husband's sister. She runs a second-hand bookstore that smells like yellowed pages and the copper of coins. In the neighborhood, most people rename every 10 years without asking the people who already live there. Mara does not like people, but she tolerates me because we loved the same man and because once, years ago, I joined her at dawn in a courthouse hallway with a thermos of coffee and a pocket of patience, and we both learned that grief bends, not breaks. When I walked into her store, she was cataloging a box of old engineering manuals. She glanced at me, grimaced in what passes for her affection, and said, "You look like you've come to arrange shelves for the apocalypse." "Something like that," I said. I told her about Alina. I told her about the attorney. I told her about the welfare check, and how kindness can wear a badge at 8 in the morning and then go home to bathe 3 children at 7 at night, and how life is full of pairs that do not contradict each other until you force them to. Mara listened. She does not interrupt. She waits the way a good violin waits, making silence feel like an instrument of its own. When I finished, she said, "What do you need?" "A name," I said. "A reporter." She made a face. "Reporters are squirrels. They chatter and then run." She thought for a moment, then pulled a card from a drawer. "This one plays chess." I looked at the name. My breath caught. "I know him," I said, quietly. "You know everyone," Mara said. "What you really want is to know him again." She read my face. "Old grief?" she asked. "Older," I said. "It belongs to my sister." Mara nodded as if this were sufficient, which it was. I walked 3 blocks to a coffee shop with the reporter's card in my pocket and Sava's questions in my throat. The reporter, Jacob, answered my call on the second ring. "I was hoping you would call one day," he said, and my knees almost failed me. He sounded older. He sounded like someone who had learned how to choose which stories would ruin the good night's sleep and which stories would give him a seat at the table. "I have something you forgot to pick up," I said. "And I have a daughter who wants to put me where papers go to sleep." "I can meet you in 2 hours," he said. "Make it 3, I said. "There is a person I want at the table who must ask his mother for permission to be late for dinner." Sava arrived early. Jacob arrived on time. Mara arrived late on purpose to explain time to the rest of us. We sat at my kitchen table. I poured tea. I unwrapped the toys. I told the story of the wolf and the fox and the bluebird. I told the story of chewing paper and what it had to do with truth. I told a condensed version of Kadia's vanishing and the case number that sat in the bluebird's chest like a child hiding under a blanket. Jacob listened without speaking until he said, "I tried to call you 11 years ago." "I know," I said. I pretended not to hear. "What made you stop pretending now?" "My daughter," I said simply. "She is the other side of the coin to the men who liked your old business cards. They use different words, but they want the same thing, for me to be quiet in a clean room." He took off his glasses, an old habit people keep when they want to be forgiven for seeing you. "What do you want?" he asked. "Nothing from you," I said. "But perhaps with you. I want this ring of guardianship parasites exposed. I want my daughter to face the consequence of aligning herself with them. I want the collector who circled my trunk to be named, and I want anyone else who has been turned into paperwork to sit up and remember how their own name tastes." "And the toys?" Mara asked dryly. "You want to add knitting to the evidence codes?" I smiled. "I want to keep the toys." Jacob opened his notebook, the old kind, with a spiral that catches the light. He asked careful questions, the ones that separate a story that can breathe in court from a story that only swells in the throat. He took the wolf's measurements. He counted the fox's tail. He swallowed hard when the bluebird gave up the number none of us could pretend not to recognize. He took photos, close and distant. He asked Sava to show his transcriptions. He asked Mara to stop scowling at him like that. Then he said, "You have a guardianship hearing in 2 weeks. What happens if you win?" "I get to keep my house," I said. "I get to keep my foxes. I get to keep calling radio shows and annoying men who carry their certainty in briefcases." "And if you lose?" "I've already chosen who to give the toys to," I said. "And I have already written the story you will publish. It begins with paper as breakfast." Mara snorted. Sava looked delighted. Jacob looked like a man preparing to open a door he had leaned against for so long he had forgotten it moved. The collector turned out to be a shell built of adjectives. He was an enthusiast, a philanthropist, a supporter of emerging makers. He was also a partner in a small firm that specialized in transitions, a word that means murder, sometimes, when you speak in legal tongues. His wife ran a community foundation that dispensed grants to places where the elderly sit in chairs that lock from the back. His brother-in-law sold scented candles that smelled like evergreen and good intentions. Jacob traced 3 property transfers from families placed under guardianship to organizations the collector chaired. The properties were rehabilitated and sold to developers whose smiling photos line the city magazine. The profits moved through half a dozen winter coats and then nodded hello to a company that billed the county for guardianship services at a rate that made inflating tires look like brain surgery. All tidy. All applauded. On the day of my hearing, I wore my pale gray suit with the small pearl buttons and pinned a silver brooch to my lapel, the shape of a bird with one wing raised. Sava sat in the back with Mara, who glared at anyone who looked at me as if interested in turning me into a line item. Jacob took a seat along the wall and wrote nothing at first, the way you do when you want to remember everything before choosing which parts deserve ink. Alina did not look at me. She sat beside MS. Raya with her hands folded too neatly in her lap. When she had been a child, her hands had never rested. They danced when she spoke, flew when she imagined, tangled in her hair when she thought no one was watching. Now they sat like a costume. The judge was a woman whose hair was pinned so precisely it felt like a message. She looked at me in the careful way a person looks at someone who might be both the protagonist and the narrator. Ms. Vera, she said, I know what a guardianship is. I also know what it is not. Let's not pretend to educate each other while we fight. Thank you, I said, grateful for her bluntness. The attorney began with gentle statistics. She moved to softer stories. It is difficult for families, she said, smiling toward the gallery, as if we were all on the same team, to navigate these moments. My client is acting out of loving concern. She presented the welfare check note, the testimony of Dr. Barnard, who looked apologetic but secure. A doctor's apology is a currency that spends well, and a photograph of my kitchen table where a damp, pulpy mass of paper sat like evidence of my supposed instability. Did you chew a legal document? The judge asked me directly. I chewed paper, I said. I cannot confirm its legal standing. The ink wore off. The courtroom laughed softly, which irritated the attorney like a hair caught under a ring. She spoke about erratic behavior. She mentioned paranoid ideation. She stopped short of saying conspiracy theorist, but the shape of it hung in the air like a bad smell. Then it was my turn. I knit, I said simply. It keeps my mind tempered and my hands honest. Knitting does not prevent dementia, the attorney said sweetly. Nor does it cause it, I replied. But it can preserve memory, and I began to lay out carefully, in the quiet, precise language courts understand, what the toys contained. I did not gesture toward Sava. I did not reach for Jacob. I spoke only about what my hands had done. I displayed the fox. I displayed the wolf. I explained the row counts and the odd-even code. I turned a secret into math and let math become ordinary, which is the thing secrets fear most. The judge leaned forward. Ms. Raya sat back as if the chair had turned ice. Alina stared at the toys with the shock of someone who has just realized that her mother has an internal life. Why embed this in toys? The judge asked finally. Because paper burns, I said, and the people in the courtroom who had spent their lives moving paper from hand to hand shifted uncomfortably. And the bluebird? The judge asked, eyes glancing at the brooch on my lapel. I looked down at my hands. The bluebird contains the case number of a missing woman who tried to file a complaint about a guardianship ring years ago and disappeared. She was my sister. Silence like a held breath. And your daughter, the judge said gently, as if we were making a circle and had to come back to the point from which we began. My daughter wants to sell the toys to a man whose company profits from the ring that stole my sister, I said. She does not know what she has been dancing with. She sees only money. She thinks she can manage it. The money is managing her. Alina stood abruptly. That is not true, she said, voice cracking. I wanted to help you. You've been alone too long. You don't understand. What don't I understand? I asked softly. Say it out loud here. Let the room hold you up. You're not safe by yourself, she said. tears in her eyes. You get confused. You hide in your crafts. You forget what day it is. You lock the door and pretend no one can touch you. Maybe I said. Maybe I do. But you cannot incarcerate a person for knitting. It's not incarceration, she whispered. What do you call it when a person cannot leave? What she called it, what any of them called it, did not matter. The judge ruled 2 days later. I was not to be placed under guardianship. The petition was denied, without prejudice, which is a way the law says, I'm leaving the door open in case you return wearing better clothes. I got to keep my house. I got to keep my trunk. The judge referred the matter of the collector's firm to the prosecutor with a face that said she was tired of synonyms. For 2 weeks, I slept without nightmares. I thought that perhaps the next part of the story would be quieter, that my daughter might come to my door with her hair pulled back and her apology sitting in both palms like a fragile bird that needed to be returned to its nest. Instead, an unmarked car began to idle 3 houses down from mine at odd hours. And the collector's wife sent me a letter that smelled like evergreen and warnings. Detective stories, real ones, are not bright with inner monologues and sudden splashes of revelation. They're granular, a long walk across small stones in shoes that do not fit. Jacob published a cautious first piece about overlapping boards and shared ownership in transition firms. The comments were predictably cruel, then slowly useful. A niece in another county mentioned assets that vanished. A nurse private messaged him about a director who counted rooms as if counting coins. A man wrote, "This sounds like what happened to my neighbor. He cried the day they took his bedroom rug away and replaced it with linoleum, said the new noise made him feel like he was always slipping." The unmarked car came twice a day, then once. Then different cars came. A woman with a baby stroller paused on the sidewalk outside my house, then looked up at the lilac and walked on. The bluebird in my knitting bag felt heavier than it was. Sava came after school and pretended to fix my cabinet door while he navigated databases with the focused look of someone convincing a labyrinth to unfurl. He found in the case number a cross-reference to an administrative hearing that never concluded. He found a form that listed evidence missing from a file. He found a witness list that included, in typed letters, the name of my sister's supervisor. The supervisor worked, 20 years later, as consultant for the collector's firm. I did not tell Alina any of this. The worst part of revenge is loving the person who deserves it. 2 mornings after the article, someone smashed my mailbox with a blunt instrument. The postmaster apologized profusely and swore she would deliver my mail by hand until a replacement arrived. I put a chair on the front porch and sat with my knitting and smiled at passersby, which is the thing you do when you want to appear ordinary while the blood in your mouth is still the taste of chewed paper. In the afternoon, I received a message from a new number. We should talk before someone makes that impossible. There was an address too far to walk to and too public to feel like a trap. I forwarded it to Sava. Then I sent it to Jacob, who replied with a thumbs-up emoji that somehow felt like a prayer in our new language. The person waiting at the cafe was the last person I expected, Dr. Barnard. He sat with his cufflinks still pretending to be magnifying glasses, and his hands folded like good intentions. He stood when I approached and gestured for me to sit. "I should tell you," he began, "that I was asked to amend my evaluation after the hearing." "By whom?" I asked. "By counsel representing the petitioning party." He did not say my daughter's name. He did not need to. "I take it you declined." I said I would not sign a statement I did not write. He smiled wryly. "They're fond of drafting reality for you and asking you to sign. What do you want, doctor?" He exhaled slowly. "To lose one less night of sleep." "What you said in court about kindness," he paused. "A man can take pride in being kind and still discover he has been used as a hinge." "You're not a bad man," I said. "But you have been standing in good lighting." He nodded. "I also have a colleague," he said, lowering his voice, "who left the Collector's Foundation last year with a box that could make windows where doors have been nailed shut. I can ask her to meet you." "Why me?" "Because you chewed paper and called it theater. Because people like me," the words slowed, "like a train stopping, need people like you to make us brave." He gave me a name. He gave me a time. I gave him the gift of listening to him say he was sorry and believing him. This is not a small gift. That night, Sava sat at my table while I wrote a list of questions for the colleague and then crossed half of them out. Jacob called with updates in the language of caution. Mara texted a photo of a hand-painted sign she'd stuck in her bookstore window. "We sell stories that bite back." At midnight, my doorbell rang. Alina stood on my porch, face blotched from crying, hair loose the way it used to be when she was 10. For a terrifying moment, I almost gathered her up and said, "Oh, my girl." But the taste of reforms and forms and guardianship still sat on my tongue. "Can I come in?" she asked, voice small. "Yes," I said, because I am not a stone. She stepped into the foyer like someone entering a museum devoted to the person she used to be. Her eyes drifted toward the trunk. She made herself look away. "I didn't know," she blurted, before we had even reached the kitchen. "About the man. About the houses." "I didn't," she swallowed. "I thought the toys were cute. Valuable, sure, but valuable like jewelry. I didn't know they were like a scolding, like a ledger." "You didn't want to know," I said gently. "It was easier to reduce me to a problem you could solve with paperwork. I wanted you to be safe. You wanted me to be manageable." She stood still, as if pinned by her own reflection in my eyes. "I was so angry," she said softly. "At you. At Dad. At everything I didn't get when I was young that you gave to Katia. I know that sounds awful. I know it was a long time ago. But you put your grief into your sister and your work and your yarn. I put mine into money. You put yours into wanting what didn't remember you," I said. She laughed bitterly. "You raised a woman who measures safety in bank statements. That must be an irony not lost on you." I poured tea. "It is my answer to everything I cannot solve yet." We sat at the table. The bluebird in my bag hummed. "Why did you file the petition?" I asked. "Because he told me it was the only way to protect you," she said, too quickly. "He said if I didn't do it, the court would force you into something worse." He said. She stopped. "Who said?" She looked down at her hands. "The collector," she whispered, and the cup in her hand trembled the smallest tremble. "Of course. He came to my office," she continued. "He said he was a great admirer of yours. He wanted to help with transitions. He said your toys were special and that if I didn't act, someone else would. He made guardianship sound like a concierge service. He said he could connect me with people who would handle everything. He asked only for the toys, and he would offset the cost of care." I thought. She laughed, a sound I hated hearing more than silence. "I thought I was saving you from loneliness. I didn't think I was selling you." I set my cup down in the dent my husband made years ago. I remembered his hands, how clumsy can be kindness when it is trying too hard. "You can fix this," I said. "Not alone. Not by apologizing. By standing in front of the man and saying your name." She shook her head. "He's already moved on," she said. "He has new families. New petitions. They don't need me." "I do," I said. It felt like laying down a sword and admitting it had weight. She looked up sharply. "You still want me," she said, astonishment softening the years between us. "I always wanted you," I said. "I just refused to want your worst ideas." We sat in silence then, not the heavy silence of a courtroom, but the shared quiet of women who remember each other's first words and last temper tantrums and the shape of a scar on a left knee. Then I told her about the meeting the next day. I told her about Dr. Barnard's colleague with a box of windows. "Come," I said. "If you want to undo something, you begin by carrying it with your own arms." She nodded. "Yes," she said. "Yes." After she went home, I called Sava and told him to stay away from the cafe. He argued. I told him, "Your courage will be required elsewhere." He sighed like a boy who remembers he is also a son and agreed. I slept a light sleep and woke before dawn. I made a list: keys, phone, bluebird, lemon. The unmarked car was not on my street. The lilac held its perfume like old ladies hold gossip. At 10, Alina and I walked into the cafe. I wore my brooch. She wore the blouse with the soup stain cleaned and still there, because life is honest. The colleague, her name was Arlette, sat in the back with a cardboard banker box that had seasonal written in marker along the side. "Seasonal?" I asked. "Isn't everything?" she said, eyes bright and tired. She opened the box. Inside, neat file folders with tabs, donor lists, board minutes, transfer agreements, transition plans, consultations. She had highlighted in soft green anything that would make a judge stop what she was doing and look up. I kept copies because things went missing, she said. Not because I'm a hero, but because I'm a person who doesn't like my work disappearing without me. I took the bluebird out of my bag and set it on the table between us. It's lovely, she said. It's a ledger, I replied. We spoke quietly for an hour, sorting what lived in her box with what lived in my wool. Alina listened, and each time she flinched at something she had chosen not to know, she did not look away. When we stood to leave, we saw the collector standing near the pastry case, as if deciding whether to choose the almond croissant or another family. Vera, he said, with a smile that ran deep as wallpaper, I've been hoping we could chat. Here? I asked, glancing around. How public of you. His eyes moved to the bluebird. Arlette closed the box. Alina stepped between us and said, very clearly, no, and the way she said it was the way a woman closes a door in a storm. Something flickered in his mouth. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even anger. It was recognition. He is used to calculating risks, and the equation had changed. Enjoy your birds, he said softly. They make very poor witnesses. Wool, I said, does not burn the way you think, and I put the bluebird back in my bag. We left with the box. We carried it straight to Jacob's office, because sometimes symbolism needs feet. He looked at its contents and exhaled like a man who has been holding his breath through 2 administrations. He called a lawyer. He called a second lawyer. He called a woman he knew who works with people who have been turned into paperwork. He began to build the story that did not need metaphors. The arrests, when they came, were polite. They always are. Men in good suits are invited to come in and speak. They bring lawyers who wear ties like weapons. They bring wives who close their foundation accounts and donate their scented candles to a school fundraiser. They switch phones. They call unmarked cars. They instruct junior partners to continue to monitor transitions, as if language alone can keep a machine running after you pour sand in it. In the middle of the mayhem, I gave half my toys away. Not to a collector. To people I had not met yet. A woman who cried when I placed the fox in her hands because the numbers in its tail matched the date the state took her husband's ring to pay for incidental charges, then couldn't find the ring. A nurse who had written to Jacob under a pseudonym and brought flowers to my doorstep, the kind of flowers that can live in water a long time. A man who had been turned into a ward and then returned to his own body like a traveler who finds his way home by touching fence posts in the dark. I gave each a toy. I gave each a counting lesson. I gave each my number. I kept the bluebird. Do not mistake this for an ending. Every good story knows better than to relax. Every good piece of revenge knows better than to let you sleep like a child again. 2 months after the arrests, Alina and I sat together in my yard, weaving stems of clover into chains like the girls we once were. We did not speak about everything because everything is not meant to be spoken. We spoke about Sava's plans for the fall, engineering, if the wind keeps its promise. We spoke about Mara's store and how she swears she will never sell scented candles. We spoke about the foxes. Then Alina said, he came to my office again. I felt that cold flood my ribs. When? Yesterday, she said. Before the indictment. He said the toys were going to be destroyed as contaminated evidence, and that it would be a mercy to purge the rest. Did you believe him? She looked at me with that particular tenderness grown children save for moments when they want to both walk away and walk back. I called you, she said. You didn't answer. I had been sleeping. The first time I had fallen asleep in a chair without fear in months. Leave a message next time, I said weakly, and we both laughed, the soft kind that surfaces when you acknowledge your own limits. What did you say to him? I asked. I told him the toys weren't mine, she said. I told him they were witnesses. I reached for her hand. She placed it in mine. We did not apologize for the months we had lost to paperwork. We did not congratulate ourselves for the part we had played in tightening a circle around men who build their houses from signatures. We sat with clover crowns and felt the wind change. That night, when the house settled like a creature into its own bones, I took the bluebird from the bag and weighed it. If you have never weighed a secret, I recommend it. It will teach you how to hold life by the place it tries to slip away from. I turned it over in my hands, pressed gently along the seam where the chest curved. I opened it. Inside, wrapped in a strip of lace I once took from my mother's collar, was a key. Not a house key. Not a car key. A safety deposit key. I stared at it for a long time. The metal was stamped with a number I did not recognize. The number in the bluebird's breast had been the case number for my sister. The key's number matched nothing I had found in the toys. Which means either I forgot a code in my own knitting, the kind of thing that keeps a woman awake, or the bird had been altered by hands not mine. There is a point in every woman's story where she can choose to be frightened or entertained. I chose entertained, and then I allowed myself the honesty of fear. I wrapped the key again and placed it inside the bluebird. I sewed the seam closed with blue silk so neat no I would see the difference. I whispered, for the first time in years, my sister's name like a door opening. Then I did the thing that changed everything. I called my daughter. Come in the morning, I said. Bring nothing but your patience. She came. We sat at the table with the dent her father made. I brought the bluebird out, cut it open gently, and showed her the key. We looked up the banks within reach of both our lives. We went to the first. It was not theirs. We went to the second. The clerk smiled politely, confused. At the third, the attendant's eyebrows rose and something very old in my belly recognized the feeling of an answer standing close. The box belonged to K.V. The front desk clerk asked for identification, and I handed her mine with hands I forced to be still. The clerk looked at my face, looked at the bluebird peeking from my bag, and then did something brave for someone who earns an hourly wage. She nodded us through. We sat in a little room lined with fake wood and quiet instructions. The clerk placed the box on the table between us and left. The lid resisted and then gave. Inside, envelopes, 5, tied with a ribbon the color of a bruise. I untied the ribbon. The first envelope held a copy of the statement my sister had tried to file, with evidence attached. The second held a list of names, some circled, some crossed, some underlined twice. The third held a photograph of my sister laughing on a beach I could not name, her hair wild and her mouth open like a bird learning to fly. The fourth held a note in my sister's handwriting. Vera, if you are reading this, congratulate the person who taught you to count. The fifth was small. Inside, a folded paper like a fortune. It read, You think you're knitting a net. You're knitting a door. The room seemed to tilt then, as if the last 10 years had just arranged themselves on a shelf and were now willing to be dusted. Alina pressed her hand to her mouth, and I realized that my daughter had never seen her aunt's handwriting. She had been too young when Claudia disappeared to remember what it looked like to be a living person with a pen. We put everything back in the box and returned it to the vault while we decided what to do with it that did not involve immediately lighting our lives on fire. On the sidewalk outside, my phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number, the same font, the same lack of ceremony as the first text I received the day of my welfare check. It said, You're not done. I turned to Alina, who read it and nodded. We weren't, she said softly. We just thought we wanted to be. We did not go home. We went to Jacob's office again. We put the last pieces on his table. He read the note twice, then once more and smiled in a way that made me remember the card my sister had tucked in her book. I think, he said slowly, your sister did not only gather evidence. I think she planned an ending she could not be present for. Or a beginning, I said. We spent the next week doing the work that does not belong in thrilling stories. Copying, notarizing, logging, distributing. We ensured 3 people had everything necessary to make a story unerasable. We took the names in my sister's list and crossed in new ink where the old ink had been smudged by too many hands. We made appointments. We canceled them. We did not sleep on the same nights, which is a good way to keep watch. The indictments widened. The collector's wife posted photographs of herself at a mountainside retreat, smiling with women who carry crystals in their pockets and call it medicine, and wrote in the caption, Healing is letting go of what no longer serves you. I wondered, as any old woman is allowed to wonder, whether her scented candles contained the smoke of paper. I chewed none of it. I also did not give the bluebird away. Readers like to ask what revenge tastes like. They expect honey or salt, vinegar or ash. I will tell you, Revenge tastes like clean water. It tastes like waking and realizing you slept because something else kept watch. It tastes like your daughter holding a key and learning to count again from one. Alina did not become a different person. She became a person willing to be a different person. She began volunteering at a legal aid clinic where people who do not look like donors sit in chairs that do not lock. She sold 3 bags, 2 pairs of shoes, and an idea of herself I had never liked anyway. She came on Tuesdays to help me package toys that were not for sale to anyone with a glossy brochure. She asked more questions than a grown daughter usually allows herself to ask. I answered some. I kept others warm in my pocket for days when she looked cold. Sava left for university, but not before building for me a tiny camera hidden in the mouth of the cedar trunk, insurance not against thieves, but against stories. So no one can say it was empty all along, he said, and kissed my cheek the way a boy sets down a promise he intends to honor. Mara came over with a pepper pie and said, "You didn't set the world on fire. You just stopped men from using matches in the wrong rooms," which is, in her language, a blessing. Jacob came by one evening with a bottle of sparkling water that tried too hard and a smile that tried less hard than it used to. "We are not done," he said, and I laughed in a way I had not laughed in years. "Spoken like a man who discovered knitting too late," I teased. He glanced at my hands. "Do you still hide messages?" he asked. "No," I said honestly. "Now I hide doors." "You want an ending." "Everyone does." "You want the collector to be sentenced to a number big enough to roll like thunder. You want the judge to use words like justice and forfeiture. You want Alina to move in with me and make soup on Thursdays. You want Sava to marry a poet and bring me grandchildren whose laughter will stitch the air with hope. You want me to stand at my sister's grave and say her name without the ache under my ribs. I will give you none of that. I will give you something else." On a Sunday afternoon the color of linen, I took the train to the edge of the city and walked to a small park where a bluebird statue sits on a stone. Someone had knitted a tiny scarf around its neck. Someone else had left a folded note beneath its tail. I did not read the note. I am too old to believe every note belongs to me. I sat on a bench and watched a little boy chase his shadow until he caught it and laughed. My phone buzzed with a message from a number I did not recognize. It said, "I have something that belongs to your sister. It is not what you think. Meet me where wool does not burn." I looked up at the statue, the scarf, the note. The way the light through the leaves made everything look like it was underwater. I looked at the bluebird in my bag and thought of the key that had taught my fingers to shake again. I thought of the collector's smile like wallpaper and the judge's neat hair and Dr. Barnard's cufflinks like magnifying glasses that had not grown up to be what their makers hoped. I thought of my daughter's hand in mine and Sava's careful camera and Mara's pie. Then I stood. I did not text back. I did not call Jacob. I did not take the train home. I walked. Somewhere, not far from where you are reading this, a woman my age chews paper between her teeth and learns what theater tastes like. Somewhere else, a daughter holds a key and counts to 1 without her mother's help. Somewhere else, a young man with a kind heart is learning to stand more stubbornly than a gate. Somewhere else, a bluebird opens its stitched chest because a secret decided it wanted to learn to breathe. And me? I turned the corner and stepped into a shadow that fit me like a dress I hadn't worn in years. I did not know what waited. I knew only this. The door I have been knitting my whole life does not close behind me. The door opens. The door opens again.
Your watch to the end. Be click here. You will hear another story from my grandma.